It's a guideline, not something you have to follow right down to the last little detail. We're talking about old school Dungeons and Dragons. Almost everything you read is a guideline, not an exact rule. You could follow it as an exact rule, but it's a guideline. I'll give you an example. World building. You start reading about how you could put together towns and places. It's like all 0 level humans. You'd be like, well, man, that means a group of characters could walk in that town and just wipe out everyone. Yeah, true. And you think, well, all right, that sounds like a bad idea. Like, how would the world function? You're completely right. You're completely right. The great thing is, it's a guideline. Now, it's using some level of common sense, which you can bring to the table as well. Here's what I mean. So, if the town has nothing worth fighting over, there's nothing there, there's no anything really valuable hanging out at that place, they might be at risk because they're not attracting certain kinds of people to the town, right? And they might be easy to take over. Walk in, take over them, burn down their huts, do whatever. It doesn't mean that an old retired warrior can't end up in a place like that. But you don't see that as the way you are meant to put that together. But you're allowed to use your common sense. So you can put an experienced warrior there like, okay, you guys get there, everyone's 0 level, the babies, the mamas, even the guards. But hey, there's that guy who's like level 10, you better watch out. He might have only one arm and works at the bar, but if that guy walks out with an axe in the other hand, your day might go bad. But he doesn't even need to be there. It could be all a bunch of 0 level people. It's a guideline, right? That's all it is. You'd be like, well, why wouldn't there just be higher level characters there? Well, usually it's not based on levels. It could be based on gear. Like the guards will have better gear. Their numbers will be a bit better than the rest of the guys standing around. Right? So higher status usually doesn't mean higher level. It means like better gear, like the guard, right? Better gear, weapons, armor, stuff like that, potentially. But what if a place has money? You know, like real valuable stuff there. That attracts other people that aren't 0 level. Again, you're allowed to use your common sense. Where do you find this? You might think, well, you're reading the world building part, but you're like reading a module and you're like, man, this contradicts everything it says here. This place has all kinds of higher level people. Well, there's something valuable there. And the people making the modules know that the initial world building part for the old school is a guideline. Not a rule. It's a guideline. I mean, you can follow these things as a rule that could be helpful. Most places could be this 0 level gimmick where there's almost nobody above, level 0, right? You could follow that for ease. And you can assume that a bunch of small places where this is actually the case, there's nothing really valuable there. These are poor, small towns, small whatever. But it's your common sense is allowed to enforce anything you want. It's about being creative. See, they give you something where it's just easier to quickly build the world like this. You go, okay, that's the world. Not hard, pretty simple guideline, right? And then you can go in after you get it all built and start etching out things, adding details. I'll put a guy here. Well, you want to know what? There's more actual higher level people in the city. That makes sense to you, right? Makes sense to you, right? If it makes sense to you, you can put it in. Nothing is telling you that you can't do that. That is the one beautiful thing about old school D&D. It's not all meant to make sense, but it is meant to let you make sense of it, right? By using your own common sense and applying anything you need to apply to make something work. TSR didn't pretend that they were putting out a perfect product. That's not even what it's meant to be. In reality, we are always game testing, always trying to figure something out. TSR knew it could never ever, figure out every detail of a game. It just couldn't. It could get it to the point where it's polished enough to put it out to you and let you go from there. And even accept your work. They acknowledged that their people, their customers, were game testers in reality. And maybe their game testers out there in the world, their customers would discover things. They had a Dragon magazine where they would take on their customers' ideas as something real. They accepted it because, well, you're still game testing. Because there's never-ending ideas and things you can do with tabletop role-playing games. That's the idea. And they wanted the game to be so open that you could apply your creativity. That's the great thing about old school. It didn't make a game where it stops you from adding to it. Right? It doesn't try to answer everything. And then by doing that, get in the way of you simply adding something where something doesn't make sense. That's been a little bit of my criticism about some of the newer additions. They try to answer everything. Then when you find a mistake in there, or something you think doesn't work, it can be really hard to adjust your own ideas into these things. But with old school, it's all guidelines with freedom. And it's very open for you to make changes. Oh, I would hear from people in the last 10 years, sometimes online, saying, man, if you just make a little change, you'll break the game. I don't know what game they were talking about, but they weren't talking about old school. Old school Dungeons and Dragons is made to be adjusted, changed, do what you want. Most everything won't just break or fall off a cliff the second you make an adjustment to it. That's what is beautiful. It's helped, how can I say, inspire a lot of game designers that we have seen through the history of the hobby. Where did they learn to make changes, come up with their own ideas? Well, they played Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe they ran it as a DM, a dungeon master. They got in, made changes, and realized you could, the game is fine, and from there you can experiment with your own ideas, and from there new games have been born. Look at the OSR. If it wasn't for people trying new things with the old rules and the old games, we wouldn't have the OSR. Now, OSR might be trying to make the layout prettier, nicer than it was before, but a lot of the OSR, well, there are games made up where people took what was there and said, I'll make a change. Old school was looking at how you actually played. It worried about the game itself. There was some very smart design. I did a recent video about monsters and how certain monsters are there to adjust your gameplay to what the designer is looking for. Manipulate you, not in a bad way. It's okay, you never thought of that danger before, but now you realize after that encounter, man, you'll never look at the dungeon the same way again. Every time you go down that hall, you'll be paying attention more. You'll be doing this. That's good design. And old school Dungeons and Dragons has all kinds of good design ideas, especially looking at a lot of things like a guideline. It's like, hey, we can't perfect this, right? We can give you an idea, right? We can give you a guidance on it. And you could even use it, but what you do here is not a big issue. It doesn't break what we're doing. All right? So in the areas where it needed to be solid, it is. Like, say, the monsters. Right? It can be very solid there. And very good design. So you would see genius design, and then you would see these guidelines. And to me, it's all genius. That openness is so important to what we do. There was a lot of times where the designers had intent for you to experience something in a certain way. Right? I recently talked about the one-to-one time focus. Well, instead of looking exactly what the rules are, look at what the designers wanted from it. That, to me, that's more important because that's clear. They want you to track time just a little better, go through the seasons, and not have the characters always in summer, right? Because you're not tracking that well. You really don't worry about months passing. So, in a way, life is not happening in that way in the game. Over a long period of time, you're not say adjusting time and everything in the game so you can give your players a unique experience. And it is an interesting experience for your players to properly go through time. So they figured if you had a hard time manually doing that, well, they had this time where you track it like this. Also, things happen. And they considered things like their old school is all about trying to simulate reality. So if a group went in that cave yesterday and got everything in it, what if another group went through? And they had ideas that people might get together in more massive groups to play these games where there'd be multiple groups playing, maybe in the same place, and we might call it a shared world. How do you do a shared world with people and everything and simulate reality? Well, you need to make sure that whatever you're doing is, it can't just be one group goes in the cave, gets all the gold, and the next day another group goes in and the same gold is there for them. The idea would be the gold's gone. You missed your opportunity. Well, that one-to-one time becomes important in maybe, or at least the concept of it, in a shared world with multiple groups. But the idea is not so much the rule that you need to follow, it's what the designers want, right? So in reality, you could do it whatever way you want, as long as whatever way you do it acknowledges reality. You can't have a group go in, one day and another group goes in the next day. So it's not that you have to follow the one-to-one time. It's a guideline. That's the loose part of TSR's view of that. And it's that guideline where it's like, hey, regardless, the people running the game, the people responsible for how things are going, how we're going to simulate this, we don't want you to make it unrealistic. We want it to be realistic. That is the aim. So even if you don't follow the one-to-one time exactly as you're being told, the idea is to try your best to simulate reality, right? That's their main concern. The one-to-one time isn't as big of an issue as don't screw this up. Make it more realistic. Simulate reality. Again, we go back to the guideline of old school. Like, look, the monsters are the exception. Well, that's really not a guideline, even though it sort of is. In a way, you could replace the monsters with different kinds of monsters as long as they're teaching the same lessons. You could make your own monsters as long as they teach the same lessons and create a sort of way of playing the game. But it also teaches you something to understand what the monsters are doing, like my recent video, where maybe, this is how creative you can be in old school, maybe you want people to play your dungeon differently. Oh, whoa, differently. Yeah, differently. But if you learn from your game testing with old school D&D, you can go, okay, what do you want from your players? How do you want them to approach your game? So then you can try to come up with a monster that might teach a lesson to the players about what they should do. If they're careless about this can happen. Right? That's the idea. And that lesson is very valuable overall. Guidance, not exact everything. When you hear about raw rules as written, that goes back to a bit of tournament play or the shared world. It's an attempt to make things consistent where DMs, game masters, might fail to be consistent in what they're doing. In reality, the consistency is important to the players. So you should learn that before you worry about raw. I might make a change, right? So what would bother my players? Not the initial change. It would be the inconsistency of applying the change. So if I make you roll something specific for swimming, trying to swim in the game, if every time you go back to try to swim, I make you roll a different dice, well, that's inconsistency, and you'd be unhappy. Now, why as a player might you be unhappy with changes? Well, you're trying to play the game, and your common sense player skill is trying to figure out things. And all you want is some level of consistency. If swimming works like this, you at least know how swimming works. So if you want to do something odd related to trying to swim, you get how that works. You have a way of predicting it through experience. But if I suddenly change how it works almost every time you're going to swim, now you can't predict anything, right? It's I wonder what he's going to make us roll this time for what reason, and how would I go about doing this weird thing of trying to swim over with this extra gear on me or something in that vein. Now it's something you're uncomfortable with. That will be what you are unhappy with. So raw becomes less important. Rules is written. What you realize is what the designers are really pushing at you is consistency for your players. Now, what happens is a lot of people in the hobby when they're given freedom, they don't learn these lessons. They're not consistent. That was the problem. That was a big problem for customers, having customers complain about things they didn't like. So what do you do to try to make the customer base happy and get the people that run the game to be more consistent in what they're doing? You push things like raw, right? And you might even have some other takes, like back in the day they thought it would be good for the company and financially good to have sort of open Dungeons and Dragons games that you can join and actually experience D&D. Well, that's another oddball situation. Well, then you got to decide what D&D is. By Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, Gary and them wanted something that they would call D&D. So think about OD&D original and the BECMI basic as experimenting with what that is. AD&D 1E, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, is what the game is supposed to be. Now, that's where the push for raw and tournament play, meaning you might meet a DM at a gaming shop, right? He's running tournament play. The company wants you to know what Dungeons and Dragons is and be able to experience it. But then they would tell you, if you go home and you play the game there, yeah, all that doesn't apply. Right? It's just to get you in to something. A lot of what they did back in the day, instead of being understood, led to confusion, debates, arguments, and in all honesty, I think TSR actually caused itself a lot of headaches and lost a lot of customers over the confusion and the arguments. I think they did, like, play whatever way you want at home, play raw here, and then you see a lot of people showing up, you play the game raw, no, you play the way you want. No, that's wrong. Oh, well, the designer doesn't say it's wrong, but there'd be people that wouldn't read everything. So again, I go back to that screwed up a lot of the mindset of what people were thinking. But it's still true. Get away from that and you realize most everything you're looking at is a guideline. And you really are free to apply your common sense. Gary didn't want you to think that your common sense wasn't common sense. Like, they understood. There's their pitch, but you might look at it and go, something wrong there. I think there's something wrong there. I think I could do something with that, and it's not telling me I can, but I think I can. Gary Gygax was very supportive of that approach. And guess what you'd find out? When you would look at something and go, in a lot of cases, not all, but a lot of cases, you'd be like, I think I could do this with that, and it would still feel like Dungeons and Dragons. It wouldn't get away from the heart of the game, the feel, or some people might say the soul, would still be there, but I could make a pretty credible change and make that thing over there better. Or I could make a minor change to the rules, like I could take out some of the things they focus on during combat. I don't want to worry about, say, certain little details. I could put that aside, right? And without focusing on that, wow, the combat goes a little faster. And it doesn't feel like less of Dungeons and Dragons. It still feels like D&D, right? But it's faster. I never heard the company say overall that's bad. And there might be some contradicting statements as Gary Gygax and them looked at TSR as a business and tried to push the game out there, but at the end of the day, he would always say, do what you want. There's so many statements out there that would smash any statement you could bring up where he says, look, this is how you do it. Well, this is where he says, nah, do it whatever way you want. And guess what? He said, do it whatever way you want more times than he said, you got to do it this way. And that's, to me, I'm not mad at Gary for that. I'm not mad at Gary Gygax, as I said. I'm not. I'm not mad at anybody from TSR. Here's what I think they were trying to figure out. They were trying to figure out what this is. They created something, and they would always try to tell you something after so many years, but then another year or two would go by, and he'd be like, maybe that's wrong. I understood that, and I've never been angry about the history of Gary Gygax and his statements on the game. And I get why they contradict each other. I don't think the man is stupid at all. I think he's a brilliant guy. I don't bow like he's a guy, but he's a historical figure that deserves the utmost respect you could imagine. Oh, and they'll say him and Dave, but you want to know what? There was a lot of guys making games back at the time that got nowhere and got out there. The power push behind Dungeons and Dragons, you really got to say you leave it to Gary, because without a Gary, you don't get D&D at all. Guys like Dave would have never got this out the way he did. And you might have guys making games or helping make games, but they weren't helping get the game out there. That's all Gary on that end. And that's why he's very famous. That's why he's the face of the brand. That's why he's historical. But he was trying to figure all this out. We weren't even 2 decades into it, and you're trying to get this man to give you every possible answer. And he's trying to appease people. He's trying to run a business. He's trying to make money. When you look at all the things and how they went down, you could understand why it was a big mess. You could understand it all. I don't hate him. But it does lead to a lot of debates and unnecessary things and us focusing on things that are meaningless, in my opinion. Oh, and it's, a lot of people do feel judged this way. Like, I go to make changes in a D&D game. It still feels like D&D, but I have these people over here going, you're not playing D&D. But that can hurt. That could hurt publicly. Now, I might not be able to recruit people, right? It's harder to recruit people now because these people over here are not socially aware that the accusation harms you publicly in what you're doing, right? But what you're doing is actually D&D. So you really even though you made changes, you strongly disagree with them, and you're like, well, I run the game. It feels exactly like D&D, but better. Better in your eyes, in your mind. So why should you sit there and allow other people to tell you what you're doing isn't Dungeons and Dragons? See, that's the way I felt. I remember early on, I made changes to 2nd edition. But it still felt like the game. But there were changes. I would hear guys going, well, that's not really 2nd edition. I'd be like, yeah, it is. Oh, no, you made that. No. Dude, when I run this, it feels exactly like D&D. It does not feel like another game. It feels like Dungeons and Dragons with improvements. I mean, what? Do I got to go work at TSR, make the changes there, get it into the product, and get it out to you before you go, oh, well, now we can say it's D&D? I'm like, no, man. It's already D&D. No matter what changes I make. And it feels exactly like Dungeons and Dragons. And it doesn't feel like an alternative game. So to hear people publicly say, oh, that's not real D&D. And then to know that certain people be like, well, I'm going to play D&D. I heard your game's not D&D. Well, that's because these clowns over here socially don't get the effects of what they're saying. They don't. And there's actually no truth to it because really, regardless of changes, it is D&D. And when you got down to it and checked out what the designers said in their wisdom, especially later in life, there's no disagreement. They would also come along, play your game and go, yeah, that's D&D. And they'd be right, and I'd be right. It's a great openness about old school. So, one beautiful thing is freedom with the old school gaming, old school Dungeons and Dragons. Guidelines, ignore the raw thing, But here's what you learn about Raw. And here's what I try to learn about Old School. This is what you're really looking to try to figure out. Raw is just to try to get you to a thing they want. The thing they want has real value. There's some truth to the thing they want. How they get you there, that's all manipulation. So that's where I say Raw is not a big issue to me. It's look at what they want. The designers were actually wise when it came to what they wanted. They just weren't so wise all the time with how you get there. And that's why I personally don't stick to rules as written. Right? But what I do is try to respect what they were after. That's what you need to know. What are they after? And once you know what they're after, it does give you a little bit of freedom. As long as what you're trying to do is trying to stick to these things. Because the things that they were after, they should have communicated that better. But they don't. They don't tell you monsters are put into the game to get you to think this way and manipulate players into playing the dungeon the way they want. They don't tell you this. You have to really look at it and figure it out. Okay, there you go. I love you.